Captain Midnight.
Let me tell you a story. It's about a young boy, born into a royal family, but raised in poverty. His father was murdered by his own brother, the king of a secretive, powerful nation. After being left behind, he was trained as a great warrior, vowing that one day he would return to his homeland, destroy the evil king that brutally killed his father, and become king himself, finally letting the rest of the world share in the wealth and life-changing technology that his uncle's family had greedily kept secret. This doesn't sound like the story of a villain, far from it. In fact, this has the structure of a classic hero's journey. The poor orphaned boy going on an adventure to defeat a murderous ruler with ancient mystical powers. But of course, telling the story this way leaves out some very important pieces of information, like the fact that our hero has killed countless people and seems to really like it, or that his final plan, while admirable in some ways, will lead to the death of thousands, if not millions of people, and that when you really get down to it, his actions seem to be mostly motivated by a deep-seated rage that causes him to lash out in vindictive and cruel ways. When you take all this into account, it's hard to consider Killmonger any sort of hero, but writing him off as a straightforward villain doesn't seem right either. And that's part of what makes him the most compelling antagonist in MCU history, in my opinion. He doesn't just give T'Challa a conflict to overcome, he also makes him question everything about his family, his position, and his country. That makes him not just a fun Marvel villain, but a fantastic, complex character in general.
I applaud your cleverness, Mrs. Richards. But even when a Panther cannot hear his victim, he can always detect.
Now, I can see a lot of people taking the title of this video as an attack on Loki, who many consider to be the best MCU bad guy, but honestly, I don't mean it to be. Tom Hiddleston is great as Loki, and I'd probably rank him as one of the best characters in the entire MCU. But, for me at least, Loki works best when he's not the villainous lead, but a supporting character. He was my favorite part of the Dark World, and one of my favorite parts of Ragnarok for a reason. That's the type of role I think he excels at. In Avengers, he represents a pretty cut and dry challenge for the heroes. They need to band together as a team or see the entire planet taken over by him and his alien overlords. It provided a great skeleton for Joss Whedon to write entertaining team scenes around, but that's about it. Loki's lust for power just isn't explored with that much depth within the film itself. This isn't the case with Killmonger. The conflict he presents to the rest of the cast goes far beyond he wants power and is willing to kill to take it. It makes them confront the sins of the past and question their own priorities. Because, let's be clear here, what T'Challa's father, did to Erik was pretty deeply messed up. Not only did he kill a child's father, he turned a blind eye to that kid's suffering for decades. As the leader of the most technologically advanced nation in the world, and someone we know has spies everywhere, it doesn't seem like he ever once checked in on Erik. If he had, he would have seen an incredibly angry and broken person who was turning into a killing machine. He could have done something about that. Instead, either out of anger or simple shame, he looked the other way on all of it, and allowed a monster to be created in the process. And that makes sense, because turning a blind eye to suffering seemed to be what he did with most things happening outside of Wakanda. But let me back up. All of this is interesting, sure, but it would be nothing without a great actor to bring it to the screen. Thankfully, Ryan Coogler knew just the guy from his previous role in Coogler's Fruitvale Station and Creed, going all the way back to his heart-wrenching role as Wallace on The Wire as a teenager. Michael B. Jordan has always been great at roles where there's a lot going on just under the surface. With Wallace, it was his childish innocence. Viewers knew no matter how tough he tried to act, this was a fundamentally decent little kid playing at being a drug dealer. With Creed, it was insecurity. He played a lot of the nervousness and anxiety of being in his legendary father's shadow. In Fantastic Four, let's just not talk about Fantastic Four. Anyway, in Black Panther, what he's playing boiling just under the surface in almost every scene is rage, and a lot of it. One scene that really comes to mind is when he gets buried in the sand and takes a trip to the spirit realm. For T'Challa, this was a very sacred, very peaceful process, where he gained encouragement from past kings. For Erik, not so much. His vision takes him to his childhood apartment, the spirit of his father still lingering there. He reverts to a scared and angry little kid, and you really start to feel for him. But when he rises from that sand, it isn't in sadness or maybe even a sense of closure that he got to speak to his dad one last time. Not at all. He comes out with pure, unadulterated anger and hate. But unlike many villains, it's not a cartoonish rage, but something very understandable and grounded. In this way, he actually reminds me of one of my favorite non-MCU bad guys, Magneto. Now that I think about it, Killmonger and Magneto have a lot in common. Both are trying to take down society as we know it. Both had very brutal childhoods. And both are even named Erik with a K, except not really. Most importantly though, both have goals that are in many ways very sympathetic, and they make some very valid points, but their methods to get to those goals are far too brutal and murderous for our protagonists to get on board. According to Black Panther co-writer Joe Robert Cole, in a lot of ways, what T'Challa and Erik want are the same things. But Erik is coming at it from a place of pain, and T'Challa ultimately finds a place of empathy. This is what puts Killmonger a notch or two ahead of the rest of the MCU villains. Not only is his goal emotionally grounded in a way that, say, Malekith's plan to conquer the Nine Realms and Thor the Dark World just wasn't, there's a sense that if T'Chaka had just made a few different choices, Erik and T'Challa could be on the same page as family. But by the time we meet Killmonger, literally murdering people in the first scene we see him in, he's just too far gone. And there's definitely an element of tragedy to that. When he's bleeding out under the Wakandan sunset, arm in arm with T'Challa but refusing to get the life-saving medical help he needs, you can't help but wonder who this guy would have been if things had played out just a little differently in his life. So even though I was sad to see him go and kind of wish he could return to the MCU Loki style, he was at least given one of the best and definitely one of the most thought-provoking deaths in any Marvel film. One of the most common criticisms of MCU villains is that their powers are a lazy mirror of the heroes. This goes all the way back to Obadiah Stane in the first Iron Man, who basically becomes Iron Man but bigger. And when the trailer for Black Panther dropped, I remember hearing those criticisms again. And it's true, in the third act Killmonger does get a suit almost exactly like T'Challa's. But it works better here, because in this movie, that's actually kind of the point. Erik literally becomes the Black Panther in the eyes of the Wakandan people. In the finale, they fight in almost the exact same suit, one purple and one gold. And when they do, it's not because they want to beat the crap out of each other, although definitely that too. It's because they're fighting over two different visions of what the Black Panther, and by extension Wakanda, represent. In the end, T'Challa comes out on top. This is a Marvel movie after all, so it probably doesn't come as a surprise that the hero emerges victorious. But after Erik dies, some of the points he made still live on. He may not have won, but he did manage to permanently change the way that Wakanda relates to the outside world. So in the end, even though I could never consider Killmonger any sort of great hero, like he is the guy willing to kill his girlfriend at the drop of a hat, it's hard to deny that he had a positive impact on T'Challa. There's enough shades of gray to him to elevate him far above the usual comic book villain. That makes him not just my favorite character in the Black Panther, but my favorite villain in the entire MCU. Hey, I hope you liked the video. I will be back next week with more Black Panther coverage, probably focusing more on T'Challa and his family. But you know, until then, don't be afraid to like and subscribe. Oh, and let me know what you thought of the movie below.